Content Introduction. Du Fei was reborn, and in this difficult era of scarce resources, he embarked on a wonderful life of cheating. Chapter 1. Natural Charming Bones. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Du Fei frowned and stared at the calendar on the wall. On Saturday, October 23, 1965, frost fell. The crack in the window was filled with a cold wind, and below the buttocks was a cold hot Kong. Just as he crossed over, Du Fei's mind was a mess, struggling to sort out the chaotic memories of the original owner. After about 10 minutes, he finally regained his senses and roughly understood his current situation. The original owner of this body, also known as Du Fei, is 18 years old and has just graduated from high school. He lives in a large courtyard near Nanluoga Lane in the capital, with 2 houses, totaling 40 square meters. My mother passed away early, and my father was a level 5 foundry worker at the Red Star steel rolling plant. He died 3 months ago due to work-related injuries. The factory gave him a pension and agreed for him to take over and work in the factory. But due to his serious illness, it has been delayed until now. Du Fei raised his hand and rubbed his temples, then looked at the room in the dim light. The roof was covered with yellowed old newspapers, the walls were mottled, and the windows were not glass, but rather gray and protruding window paper. Under the window was a hot Kong, and the bedding on it had not been washed for a long time. It was hard to touch and there was a strange smell. In the corner of the wall opposite the heated Kong, there is a large cabinet with a mirror facing the door. Next to it are 2 low cabinets stacked with camphor wood boxes, as well as an 8 Immortals table and 2 official hat chairs. On the table, there is an old-fashioned winding clock and a set of white porcelain teapots and cups. Furniture has been around for some time, and there is not much wood to be seen, making it a decent piece of furniture in this era. Du Fei moved his neck and got up to come to the cabinet. The mirror on the cabinet door reflected a young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes, but a pale face. My hair is greasy and messy. I haven't washed it for a few days, and my clothes are dirty with several patches on top and bottom. Du Fei rubbed his cheeks vigorously in front of the mirror. The real sensation of touch and pain convinced him that it was not a dream. He was truly reborn until 1965. Du Fei's throat rolled and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva, his stomach growled and a strong sense of hunger surged out. From last night until now, the original owner has been in a coma for a whole day, and it has been more than 10 hours since he was reborn that Xiaoe has not had any teeth. Walking to the table, he picked up the white porcelain teapot on the table, which was shaking with most of the water inside. Du Fei was about to take a cup and drink enough water first, but suddenly his pupils shrank. A grid-like space suddenly appeared in his mind, and he had a feeling that as long as he moved his mind, he could put the teapot in this space. Next moment, suddenly, the white porcelain teapot that was held in his hand suddenly disappeared, and an identical teapot appeared in his personal space. This space is not large, with a teapot as a reference, it is estimated to be only 2 meters square. There was a fist-sized white light ball suspended in the center of the space, which was of no use at the moment. Just as the teapot entered, the light ball shook slightly and there was no more movement. Another thought, the teapot returned to my hand. Du Fei's excited face turned slightly red, and he instantly thought of countless ways to use this personal space. His breathing was a bit rapid, which made him even more thirsty. He quickly poured a glass of water and gulped it down in one gulp. Wait a few minutes, calm down and feel a stronger sense of hunger. Put the rest aside, no matter what, fill your stomach first before proceeding. Based on my memory, I went to the outer room, opened the rice jar next to the stove, and peered inside. There is a dry cloth bag at the bottom of the cylinder, which weighs 4 or 5 pounds when lifted by hand. The inside is full of stick surfaces. Grasping it with your hand, it even pricked your hand. Although it looked like a yellow-orange, it was incomparable to the finely ground stick noodles of later generations. Du Fei frowned and decided not to cook for himself. He turned around and returned to the inner room, starting to rummage through boxes and cabinets. Although not dressed very well, the original owner's family is really not poor. Original master father, the 5th-level foundry worker who was promoted 2 years ago, earns a monthly salary of 48.5 yuan, which is more than enough to support 2 people. Over the years, he has saved over 400 yuan. In addition to 500 yuan for work-related injury compensation, Du Fei dug out nearly 1,000 yuan, dozens of various tickets, and a white jade bracelet from the interlayer inside the cabinet. This is a huge sum of money. Now a permanent 28-weighted bicycle costs only 180 yuan, and a Shanghai brand 160 radio costs 140 yuan. You can buy a small courtyard house in Beijing for just over 2,000 yuan. Throwing the money ticket and bracelet into his personal space, Du Fei was about to leave. Unexpectedly, the space suddenly started to vibrate slightly. A layer of white light appeared on the jade bracelet that had just been thrown in, and it was slowly absorbed by the floating light ball in the space. Du Fei let out a "hey" and quickly took out the jade bracelet to check. I found that this bracelet had no other abnormalities except for a slightly dull luster. On the contrary, the light sphere in space seems to enlarge by a circle after absorbing white light. Du Fei pondered for a moment, but still didn't know where to go. Instead, his stomach became even hungry, so he had to put the bracelet back first. Just as I left, in an instant, a cold wind rushed towards my neck. Frozen, Du Fei shrunk his neck and closed the door behind him, walking towards the front yard. This large courtyard was originally a 3-in and 3-out courtyard, with his home located in the innermost backyard. To go out, one must pass through the front courtyard of the middle courtyard. It's just past 5 o'clock and it's not dark yet. As soon as Du Fei left, he met a chubby man wearing a blue cotton jacket, carrying a hand on his back, swaying step by step with a confident demeanor. "Second grandpa, you're off work now." Facing each other, Du Fei habitually greeted him, and a large new memory surged in his mind, causing him to frown. But the footsteps did not stop, passing through a moonlit door and arriving at the courtyard of the courtyard. The courtyard has the largest area and the largest number of residents, making it noticeably more lively. Boiling water, cooking, adults shouting, children making noise, everything is chaotic. Du Fei was frowning and digesting new memories of his neighbors in the courtyard when he suddenly saw a beautiful figure. Wearing a blue cloth floral jacket, the cuffs were pulled up high, revealing 2 white lotus-like arms as they scrubbed and washed the clothes. "Damn it, isn't this Qin widow?" A group of grass mud horses rushed past in Du Fei's heart. That second uncle just now was Lu Haizhong. With a growl, Du Fei swallowed and froze, his face suddenly turning black. Reborn once again, unexpectedly ran to the courtyard of Qin Man. At this moment, Qin Huairu seemed to sense Du Fei's gaze and looked up. I have to admit, aside from character, this pretty widow is really beautiful. Without applying makeup, one can easily become one of the internet celebrities in later generations, and their figure is also quite impressive, especially their peach blossom eyes. In the large basin in front of me, due to the addition of hot water, a white mist rose up, and I vaguely looked at it in the mist, creating an indescribable atmosphere. "Xiao Du, how are you today?" Qin Huairu smiled and stopped her work, enthusiastically saying, "What do you have to do?" "Tell Qin sister, don't be polite." "Thank you, Sister Qin." Du Fei twitched his lips and hastily took 2 steps out of the courtyard. As a newcomer, he doesn't want to immediately confront high-level green tea like Widow Qin. "This kid, what are you busy with?" Looking at Du Fei's back, Qin Huairu frowned and then rolled her eyes. She didn't know what was on her mind and pursed her lips with a sweet smile. Arriving at the front yard and saying hello to the 3rd master who was cleaning his bicycle, Du Fei finally rushed out of the courtyard. Looking back, there were mottled red doors, dilapidated lintels, and the noisy voices of people in the courtyard. Du Fei suddenly smiled. Silly Zhu, Su Damao, the three masters in the front, middle, and backyards, as well as the generous Jia Zhang family. In this era without mobile phones and internet, the courtyard where chickens fly and dogs dance from time to time, life will definitely be quite exciting in the future. Chapter 2. Grandpa's Son, Director. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Du Fei was well prepared and planned to go to the restaurant at the alley to have a bite, but when he turned around, he saw a square-faced man wearing a blue clothwork uniform walking towards him. This person is 40.7 or 8 years old, with a shaved head, thick eyebrows and big eyes, and a positive expression on his face. He is exactly Yi Zhonghai, an old man from the middle courtyard. In fact, the three stewards of the courtyard were not initially meant to handle trivial matters between neighbors. At the beginning of the founding of the People's Republic of China, the registered residence system was not perfect. In order to prevent potential damage by enemy agents, a steward was selected in a complex compound, similar to the ancient Baojia system. If abnormal personnel were found, they should be reported immediately. But by the 1960s, enemy spies had basically disappeared, and the officials in charge of each hospital had become dispensable. Du Fei and Yi Zhonghai looked at each other, and some unpleasant memories came to mind. Yi Zhonghai didn't expect to meet Du Fei, and a hint of embarrassment flashed in his eyes. His cheeks bulged and he called out Du Fei's name. "Grandpa, what's up?" Du Fei stood still, expressionless. Yi Zhonghai came up to him, looking at no one on either side, and lowered his voice. "I talked about that yesterday. Is that okay? Can you give me a message? Director's son will come tonight." Du Fei was half a head taller than Yi Zhonghai, and the two of them looked at each other, slightly condescending. Although the original owner had good academic performance, he had a soft temper. When faced with an old man, he would inevitably bow down and be petty. Not only would his eyes droop, but his back would also be slightly respectful. However, today, Yi Zhonghai clearly noticed a difference. The two of them looked at each other silently for 2 seconds, and Du Fei said calmly, "Is that okay? We'll talk about it when we come." After that, he turned around and walked away. Yi Zhonghai opened his mouth and wanted to say something more. But a half-grown boy carrying a soy sauce bottle burst out of the courtyard, and it was Yan Jiquang, the eldest of the three masters. "Yo, Grandpa, you're off work now." Yan Jiquang shouted and ran away quickly. When Yan Jiquang ran away, Du Fei had already walked 7 or 8 meters away, and Yi Zhonghai had to walk into the courtyard with a gloomy face. Du Fei left the alley and walked along the main street for more than 10 minutes until he arrived at the intersection in front of the Nanluo Supply and Marketing Society. There is a restaurant next to the intersection, which, although not large in scale, is officially state-owned. Du Fei pushed open the door, lifted the heavy cotton curtain, and a gust of hot air rushed towards him. Glancing inside the restaurant. Even for dinner at night, there are only 3 tables of guests. After all, in this era, there are not many people willing to dine out. Du Fei found a table by the stove and sat down. A waiter, who was not tall and had a thick physique, walked over with a big mouth and asked, "What would you like to eat?" Du Fei glanced at the menu written in calligraphy on the wall, along with the slogan, "No scolding, beating or scolding customers," and quickly ordered a soft meat slice and a large bowl of rice. 6 cents, 2 liang of grain tickets, 1 liang of meat tickets. The waiter quickly pulled out a list and placed it on the table. Du Fei paid the money and waited for the dishes to be served, while recalling what Yi Zhonghai had just mentioned. Just last night, Yi Zhonghai found the original owner alone, began to ask for warmth and comfort, then insinuated, and finally expressed his hope that the original owner would give up the spot to take over the factory to a person named Sun Chang. This Sun Chang is the son of Director Sun in the first workshop of the steel rolling mill where Yi Zhonghai is located. The original owner never dreamed that a highly respected master in the courtyard would help outsiders snatch his job after his father's death. Still shamelessly speaking out the reasons in a grand manner. What about the heavy workload in the steel rolling plant workshop? His body and bones are too weak to withstand it. He also said that Director Sun would help him find a job in the street office, sitting in the office every day without going to the workshop, which is very light and efficient. Finally, there is a subtle threat that if he dares not listen, even if he takes over and enters the factory, there will be no good fruit to eat. The original owner recovered from a serious illness and had a soft temper at the beginning, but later on, he became more and more frustrated and anxious. He fainted directly and woke up as Du Fei 4 or 5 minutes the waiter brought the food up. The freshly steamed white rice is steaming hot, and a large bowl can hold at least 3 bowls of regular rice. The soft and smooth meat slices next to it are also full of weight. The meat slices are all lean meat, with starch added, and the taste is very tender. In this era, unlike later generations, people nowadays have little oil and water in their stomachs. Fat meat is better for meat, and the thicker the fat, the better the pork. The meat slices used for cooking in restaurants are almost invisible. The mushrooms, fungus, and carrots in the side dishes are also well cooked. The seasoning is a bit salty, but it's quite appetizing. Du Fei was also extremely hungry, so he shook off his cheeks and went straight to work. 3 times down, 5 times divided by 2, half of the bowl of rice was eaten, and it was only when it was 6 or 7 times full that the speed slowed down and began to eat while continuing to contemplate. At the end of the day, the original owner was a student in his teens with little social experience. I don't have any relatives or elders around me who can come up with ideas. Faced with the sudden joint threat from Director Sun and an old man, I was completely helpless except for anger. But Du Fei, who had spent more than 10 years in the society before his rebirth, had already become an old fogey. He thought very clearly that according to the current succession system, as long as he didn't let go, neither Yi Zhonghai nor Director Sun could force him to take over the position. But... and then... Yi Zhonghai is right in saying something. Even if he braves the pressure and takes over the steel rolling mill, he will definitely not have good fruit to eat. At that time, it was Sun Wukong who entered the alchemy furnace of the Supreme Lord, and Director Sun, who was angry and embarrassed, had 100 ways to concoct him. Only one thing, Du Fei couldn't figure out why Yi Zhonghai was helping Director Sun take the lead. There are over 10,000 people at the Red Star steel rolling plant, and Yi Zhonghai is one of the only 2 8th-level workers, who have face in front of several factory directors and deputy directors. Although Director Sun is a workshop director and Yi Zhonghai's immediate superior, he never has such a great ability to casually manipulate Yi Zhonghai. After more than half an hour, Du Fei returned to the courtyard. He originally wanted to go to the supply and marketing cooperative across the street after finishing his meal, but he didn't know they would finish work on time and close the door early when he came out. Du Fei was walking towards the courtyard when a half-grown boy with a lid cut ran out with 2 little girls. The 3 children are the stick stems, Xiao Dang, and Huaihua of the Qinhuai Ru family. Du Fei stood on the steps, watching the 3 children run away. Unlike most children in this era who looked yellow and thin, the 3 children in the Qin family all had round faces and their clothes were washed clean. Du Fei wiped himself off and was about to continue walking inside. A figure happened to bump into him head-on. Oh my! With a coquettish moan, Du Fei stumbled and the person leaned back. Du Fei let out a cry and quickly tugged, but neither of them fell. With a sigh of relief, upon closer inspection, it turned out to be Yuli, the eldest daughter-in-law of the 3rd master's family. This newlywed young woman is quite beautiful. Although her appearance cannot match that of Qin widow's seductive son, her figure is not inferior. Just now, through her cotton jacket, one can feel the astonishing scale and elasticity. Yuli was in pain from the collision and quickly rubbed with her hands, with tears on her face. However, it was not that she had just been hit, but clearly that she had cried earlier. Upon discovering that Du Fei was looking at her, his cheeks turned red and he awkwardly wiped away his tears. Ignoring the waves of pain from Nizi, he remained silent and walked away with a heavy head. Du Fei couldn't help but think that he had an argument with the leader of the Yen family when he saw her. As the old saying goes, poor couples often suffer from setbacks. The third master, nicknamed Yen Laoku, was the master who split a penny into two halves. Yuli married into the Yen family and had no job. The old man Yen Jicheng was a temporary worker with a monthly salary of only over 10 yuan. In addition to half of it being paid to the family, he also had to pay for meals, bicycles, flashlights, and other expenses. It's strange that he could live a comfortable life like this. Chapter 3. The Lion's Great Opening. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Du Fei walked through the front yard. It's already dark, and everyone is lighting up their lights. As he passed by the courtyard, Du Fei glanced at an old man's house. Just as I saw a corner of the curtain by the door being lifted, a pair of eyes inside were vaguely looking out. When I saw Du Fei appear, I immediately lowered the curtain. Du Fei knew it clearly in his heart. I estimate that Director Sun has already arrived and is currently at Yi Zhonghai's house. As expected, Du Fei returned home, and just as he lit the stove to burn the Kong, Yi Zhonghai and Director Sun came to his door. Yi Zhonghai started without knocking on the door and walked in directly, followed by a middle-aged man with black-rimmed glasses. Du Fei looked at the other person calmly. In Zhongshan suit, with a forward hat and a smile on his face, Director Sun's first impression was quite impressive. The Red Star Steel Rolling Plant is a department-level unit, and the workshop director is at least at the deputy department level, on the same level as the deputy county chief. Being able to sit firmly in this position is likely not just a matter of wine and rice bags. At the same time, Director Sun is also observing Du Fei. The young man standing in front of him did not show any anger or hatred, nor did he shrink back from his leadership. This made Director Sun have a vague premonition that tonight's matter may be difficult to handle. 3 people enter the inner room. Du Fei politely asked Director Sun and Yi Zhonghai to sit on the official hat chair, calmly picked up the tea cup, and poured 2 cups of water. We don't have any tea at home, you two understand, said Du Fei calmly, taking a step back and sitting on the Kong. Director Sun glanced at the teacup and then at Yi Zhonghai next to him. Du Fei's calm and composed demeanor caught him off guard, but for the sake of his son, he did not turn back. Comrade Xiaoe, Master Yi has already told you about the specific situation. What do you have in mind? Director Sun decided to get straight to the point. Maybe this kid in front of him is just bluffing. An old man told me everything yesterday. Du Fei, I'll give your son the spot to take over from the factory and let me work as a temporary worker on the street. Director Sun, should I understand this correctly? Xiaoe, this is also for your own good. Yi Zhonghai frowned and put on an old man's airs, directly starting to preach. Entering the workshop is a heavy physical labor, and just your body can't bear it. Although going to the street is a temporary worker, the work is easy. Sitting in an office is not good, isn't it? Besides, going to the factory and following the street earns a salary of 16.5 yuan. What else are you not satisfied with? Du Fei didn't pay attention, did he? Yi Zhonghai looked at Director Sun with a half-smile and said, Director Sun, my brother Sun also graduated from high school, right? Director Sun was taken aback and immediately realized that Du Fei was referring to his son, but there was something strange about him. What was Du Fei doing? Then you should understand how difficult it is to take the high school entrance exam, right? Said Du Fei. Director Sun recalled that his son had taken the high school entrance exam before, and he also sighed, yes. There are 50 or 60 students in a class, and that's the only one who can go to high school. I also graduated from high school. Du Fei suddenly shook his face and looked fiercely at Yi Zhonghai and Director Sunday. Why do you think you can fool me like a fool? I take over from the factory and am a state-owned official. As long as I don't make a big mistake, even the factory director has no right to dismiss me. What is going on the street? A temporary worker who says get out of here, get out of here, and have the face to say I'm not satisfied. Yi Zhonghai is hated, and blush. There's still a salary. Du Fei snorted coldly. In the first 3 years of entering the factory, I was paid an apprentice's salary, but I graduated from high school and it's not foolish. It's not excessive to be rated as a level 5 worker until I turn 30, right? A monthly salary is only 55 yuan. As a temporary worker in the street office, I am currently working there for 16.5 yuan. If I work there for 10 years, it will still be 16.5 yuan. Can I compare it? Yi Zhonghai opened his mouth, but remained silent. Director Sun initially had a serious expression, but after Du Fei finished speaking, he relaxed and picked up the tea at hand. After taking a sip of water, the cup smiled and said, "Comrade Xiaoe, it seems that you also understand. Since that's the case, let's open the window and speak frankly. What do you want?" Just now, Du Fei had been emphasizing the unequal interests of both sides, but he did not reject them severely on the spot. Director Sun immediately sensed the clues and felt that there was a way. 500 yuan, 10 industrial vouchers, 1 bicycle ticket, and 1 radio ticket. Du Fei remained calm and offered the price. Upon hearing this, Yi Zhonghai and Director Sun immediately changed their colors. These bills must add up to thousands. I didn't expect Du Fei to be so bold and dare to speak up to them like a lion. Especially Director Sun stood up on the spot and patted the table. "This is impossible." Du Fei remained calm and composed. "Director Sun, you don't have to brag with me. If there were any other ways, would you come to me? Although my father didn't deserve to be named a martyr, he just died in the factory and is now taking my job. If this were to spread, what would the old women with 5 spines and 6 beasts in the factory say about you?" Director Sun and Yi Zhonghai's faces looked even worse. They didn't expect that Du Fei could see through so clearly at a young age. Especially Yi Zhonghai, regretting not being obsessed and getting involved in this matter. Director Sun's eyes flickered, still hoping for luck, and he snorted coldly, "So what? I won't take this spot if it's too big. This can't be done by you." Du Fei sneered, "I have to book this 1,000 yuan ticket and the work in the street office. I've had a hard time with you, I dare not go to work in the factory. If there were another work that related injury one day, I would die without anyone to collect my body." Director Sun was horrified in his heart and even more wary of Du Fei. If you can think of being killed by the enemy, you will definitely think of killing the enemy. Although Director Sun and Yi Zhonghai came from the war era, neither of them had any military experience, so it's hard to say they killed someone. "What do you want to do?" Director Sun's throat rolled and he gulped down a mouthful of foam, and his courage to speak immediately weakened. "Tomorrow morning, I will go to the factory to find Director Yang and Deputy Director Li." Du Fei's face remained expressionless, but he spoke with murderous words. The workshop director persecuted work-related orphans and cleverly took over the succession quota. I asked them face to face, and the factory took care of it. If the factory doesn't care, I will go to the district. If the district doesn't work, I will go to the city. I want to see if Director Sun can have a good eye. With a thud, Director Sun sat back in the chair, beads of sweat oozing from his forehead and temples. If it's really what Du Fei said, then he's definitely done. You don't even need to go to the district or city, Director Yang won't be able to pass the test. Yi Zhonghai also lost his composure, his face pale and at a loss. For a moment, the room fell silent, with only the heavy breathing of Director Sun and Yi Zhonghai. A few minutes later, Du Fei was the first to break the silence. Since Director Sun is currently undecided, why not go home and discuss first? I'll wait for you until tomorrow morning. Just now, Director Sun's heart was in turmoil. At this moment, he suddenly woke up in shock, as if he had lost his energy and spirit. He shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "No need," I agreed. Du Fei's lips curled up and he smiled. "First of all, I wish my grandson a smooth sailing and a bright future when he enters the factory. Director Sun was stunned for a moment, his mood becoming even more complicated. A money ticket worth thousands of yuan, although painful for him, is not enough to cause muscle or bone damage. More importantly, his goal of having his son replace Du Fei's successor in work at the rolling mill has finally been achieved. According to reliable information, the wind direction will change next year, and unemployed middle and high school graduates will all go to the countryside. Director Sun was unwilling to let his son work as a temporary worker in the street office, so he set his sights on Du Fei and wanted to change jobs with him. But I didn't expect to be bitten hard by 100 secrets and one slip. Chapter 4. Su Damao and Lu Xiaoe. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Seeing off Director Sun, Yi Zhonghai returned home. How's it going? Is it done? The old lady asked with concern, only to find that Yi Zhonghai's eyes were dazed, and she noticed that it wasn't okay. Didn't we talk about it? Yi Zhonghai sighed and said, I've really taken a wrong look this time. Old Du, this son, is not an ordinary person. The old lady listened in a daze, but was quite patient and didn't urge her, silently listening. It wasn't until he heard that Du Fei had asked for thousands of yuan in banknotes and industrial vouchers that he couldn't hold back for the first time and let out a scream of surprise. But he didn't interrupt. After Yi Zhonghai finished speaking from beginning to end, he pursed his lips and nodded, saying, if it's really like this, the old Du family kid is really extraordinary. Please be careful and try not to offend him in the courtyard in the future. Yi Zhonghai sighed, not to mention in the future, this time I offended that kid to death for the sake of my grandson. Then you'll be promoted to deputy director. The old lady glanced at the door and lowered her voice. I guess we'll have to take a break. Yi Zhonghai frowned tightly. 1,000 yuan is not a small amount. Old Sun didn't say it on his lips, but he also felt uneasy. Unless our family pays for it, don't expect him to do anything for us again. A middle-aged woman's eyes flickered with a hint of excitement, Lao Yi. Before she could say anything, Yi Zhonghai waved his hand and said, it's not worth 1,000 yuan to change the deputy director of the workshop. Anyway, Sun Chang will definitely come with me when he enters the factory. When he comes, old Sun will beg us. The old lady nodded silently. Yi Zhonghai said again, old lady, you said you offended the Du family kid this time. Why don't you try to make up for it? After thinking for a moment, the old lady said, I think. Let's just forget about it. I don't want to provoke him in the future. Lao Yi, as you just said, that kid is too wild and ruthless, and he's so young. I don't know the depth. I think he'll cause trouble sooner or later. Meanwhile, in Du Fei's house. The heated Kong heated up, and Du Fei extended his feet under the mattress, feeling warm and comfortable. I am still thinking back to the scenes just now. This is already the best result he can fight for. Don't be fooled by the confrontation with Director Sun just now. Du Fei seemed to have completely crushed him, but ultimately it was all a bluff. If Director Sun had a tough head, he would never have gone to find Director Yang, let alone cause trouble in the district or city. By doing so, Director Sun was certainly doomed, but as the leader of the steel rolling mill, if such a scandal occurred in the factory, Director Yang and Deputy Director Li would also have to follow suit. Du Fei is equivalent to offending the entire leadership of the steel rolling mill to death. Actually, before this, Du Fei had thought about the worst-case scenario. If Director Sun is tough to the end, he can only go to great lengths to find Deputy Factory Director Li, transfer from the production workshop to the logistics department, and leave Director Sun's authority. Vice Factory Director Li is quite trustworthy in handling matters with money. Just finding him to handle things, 100 or 200 yuan is definitely not enough, at least 500 yuan is enough. Du Fei's thoughts were chaotic, and he unknowingly arrived late at night. Take a breath and prepare to pee and sleep. To prevent Director Sun from taking risks, he carefully tied the doors and windows before going to bed, and placed a few metal pots and pans behind the doors and windows to rest assured. The next morning, the stove on the hot Kong had already gone out, and there was still a leak in the window, which woke Du Fei up from the cold. It was agreed yesterday that Director Sun will clear the relationship between Qian Piao and the street office within 3 days. As long as Du Fei goes to the street office to work, the work of the steel rolling mill belongs to Sun Chang. As for how Director Sun operates, Du Fei doesn't have to worry about it. Drill out of the cold bed. Du Fei carried his basin and toothbrush to the faucet in the courtyard to wash his face and brush his teeth. As soon as you leave, just as I met a tall and thin man with a mustache walking out of the west wing across from me, it was Su Damao, a film projectionist from the steel rolling mill. Yo, big brother, it's Sunday, so early. Du Fei greeted with a smile. Su Damao was stunned for a moment. I usually don't talk to this stuffy gourd across from him. At most, I nod when we meet. What's going on today? However, Su Damao is a scene person, so even if he shouts Damao Gu to Du Fei, he cannot shake his face with others. After a nod, he squatted next to brush his teeth and asked, Xiao Du, you look good and your illness should be over. When do you plan to start working in the factory? Du Fei squeezed out toothpaste and squatted next to Su Damao. Let's wait for a few more days to see. The factory is too heavy to work in, and I'm afraid I won't be able to eat. I want to find someone to see if we can change places. Su Damao's eyes changed and he couldn't help but look at Du Fei, secretly surprised. In theory, they lived in the same courtyard for more than 10 years, knowing each other's roots and bottom line, and never heard of any connections from the old Du family. However, Su Damao was somewhat sophisticated and didn't delve into the details. After brushing his teeth and washing his face, he and Du Fei went back to their respective houses. Putting down his basin and toothbrush, Su Damao was still pondering the information revealed in Du Fei's words just now. Walking into the inner room, his wife Lu Xiaoe was still soundly asleep, with a round oval face that was flushed. One arm fell outside the quilt, revealing her snow-white arms in a bright red silk nightgown. Su Damao's family has good conditions and buys more coal in winter than other families, so there is no need to calculate how to burn it. The house is warm and cozy early in the morning. Lu Xiaoe, a young lady from a capitalist background, made Su Damao both love and fear her. That plump body is definitely the best soaking rack, but unfortunately Su Damao's firepower is insufficient, and he can't get up or down every time, even if he secretly takes medicine, he can't withstand it. On the other end, Du Fei returned to the house. First, roll up the bedding in Kong mat. He had enough of the night last night. The heated Kong heated up the mattress, and the smell was both moldy and rotten, so let's not mention it. And there's also that Kong mat, it's all broken and crumbling, and even a broom can't clean it. Du Fei is preparing to change everything and also buy a few outfits. He didn't just slip his tongue when he said those things to Su Damao earlier, but deliberately let it slip. He voluntarily gave up his job at the steel mill, not under pressure. This matter cannot contain fire in paper. Turning around, he went to the street office as a temporary worker, but Sun Chang entered the factory and took his place, which would definitely attract many people to chew their tongues. At that time, when outsiders talk about the situation, they will only feel that he is easy to bully. If something happens in the future, even cats and dogs dare to step on him. Du Fei must be prepared in advance. Picking out an unpaved garment from the wardrobe, he walked straight out of the courtyard, strolling leisurely towards Longfu Temple Street. From Nanluo to Longfu Temple, it can be said whether it is far or not, and it can be said whether it is near or not. Du Fei was neither too slow nor too fast, and it was already over 8 o'clock when he arrived at Longfu Temple. The breakfast shop here, which is a public-private partnership, is said to have the most delicious fried liver buns. Du Fei came all the way to taste this taste. A bowl of fried liver, 6 steamed buns, and finally a bowl of bean curd jelly served with sauce. Eating it made me feel warm all over, and I had a big hiccup, which made me feel extremely comfortable. It's almost 9 o'clock since I left the breakfast shop, and then I'll go to the department store. Facing the small north wind, Du Fei thought to himself that he should get a bicycle, otherwise it would be inconvenient to go anywhere. However, buying a new bicycle was too eye-catching in the courtyard, and he didn't make up his mind, so he went into the department store. Chapter 5. Classmates. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Passing through the revolving door, Du Fei stood on the first floor, his eyes looking around. In his memory, he had a high school classmate who worked as a salesperson here. Although his relationship was average, he was at least an acquaintance and didn't know which floor he was on. Sister, could you please drive me? Do you know Xiaoe? I'm his classmate. Du Fei asked a salesperson who was knitting a sweater. Xiaoe. The salesperson, in her 40s, casually lifted her eyelids, looked at Du Fei, and paused for 2 seconds. On the east side of the second floor. Du Fei thanked him and turned around to climb the stairs towards the east. From a distance, I saw a tall girl in a purple sweater with 2 fried dough twists braids, chatting with others cheerfully behind the counter. Xiaoe is quite beautiful, but unfortunately she is too thin to develop. Xiaoe, Du Fei strode forward with a meteor. The original owner had a dull personality and was not outstanding at school, but he was tall and energetic. Xiaoe recognized him at first glance and smiled. Du Fei, why did you come? I miss my old classmate, Du Fei joked. Just now, when the older sister who was chatting next to her heard this, her eyes lit up and she scanned the two of them. The fire of gossip ignited brightly. Xiaoe was taken aback for a moment, then rolled her eyes and crossed her hips with a wide grin. You're not sneaking away. You have something to say, do you want to buy something? Du Fei was not polite either, he quickly reported a list. Xiaoe was shocked and blinked her eyes wide. What's wrong with you? Time is running out, she said. Du Fei was too lazy to explain the whole story and said perfunctorily, not all of them are mine, but also for my colleagues in the unit. You need to pick out the good ones for me later. That's right, no wonder. There are too many things, I can't remember. You write them down first. Xiaoe didn't delve deeper, picked up a pen, pulled out a piece of paper, and pushed it over. By the way, where did you graduate? She looked like she didn't even know something had happened to the Du Fei family. I've entered the street office, temporary worker. I can't compare to your iron rice bowl, Du Fei replied while brushing his pen. You can go quietly into the street, and in the future, you will become a national cadre. Xiaoe was surprised. The street office in the capital is a legitimate county-level administrative unit, and even countless temporary workers cannot enter. With a reserved smile, Du Fei finished writing the list and pushed it forward, boasting shamelessly, what kind of cadres are not cadres, they are all serving the people. Virtue. Xiaoe gave him a cold glance, took the order, glanced at it, and came out of the counter. Follow me. Half an hour later, Du Fei and Xiao Lu came out of the department store. This time helping him, Xiaoe really put in a lot of effort. She went to each counter with a list and picked the best ones. If you don't have acquaintances, don't even think about this treatment. I had to help Du Fei find someone to make an internal special offer, but Du Fei didn't agree. A total of over 80 yuan was collected. If you don't mind the trouble, you still owe me a favor, so it's not worth saving 7 or 8 yuan. Du Fei grabbed something with both hands and crawled into a small alley, looking at no one on either side. With a thought in his heart, he put the thing away. It should be said that this portable space is really convenient. Otherwise, carrying these 2 large bags, he wouldn't have gone anywhere else and would have gone straight back home. After leaving the department store, Du Fei saw that it was still early and thought to himself that being idle was also idle. It was better to take a good stroll. Take the tram out of Tianmen Street and get off at Dashilan. In this era, the outside of the front door is still the busiest commercial district in Beijing. As soon as I got off the car, I saw a scene full of tourists, much more lively than the department store. First, head to Zhang Yuan Tea House and buy a big bag of jasmine high shatter. I strolled around the Dashilan with tea, bought some dim sum and ate. At noon, I had a bowl of stewed tea in the Mengang Hutong, and then I took the tram back to Nanluoga Lane. But Du Fei still didn't go home directly. Instead he went to the Red Star bathhouse diagonally opposite the Supply and Marketing Cooperative to take a bath. After soaking in the big pool, I called for a bath master, who turned red all over and felt like I had lost 2 pounds. Then there was a whole process of getting a haircut, shaving, and getting a pedicure, which didn't cost a single yuan. Before leaving, I put on the newly bought leather shoes from the department store and a half coat with a dog leather lining, which was both energetic and warm. Standing in front of the dressing mirror in the bathtub hall, Du Fei was completely different from before. Du Fei was already tall and handsome. With a height of 1.8 meters, he stood out among the crowd in this era, causing 2 young wives who had just finished washing up and were about to leave to steal glances. When he returned to the courtyard, it immediately caused a small sensation. As soon as I entered the gate, I ran into the third master who was going out to help me. Yo-ho! The third master was startled and looked up and down several times before finally confirming it was Du Fei. Xiaodu, you're going to heaven. You're acting like a groom's official. Third master. Du Fei also deliberately showed off, flipping up the hem of his coat. How about the woolen surface, the black dog fur lining outside the gate? Humph, this is not cheap, life is limited. The third master reached out to touch the slippery dog hair, feeling both envy and jealousy in his heart. This kind of leather jacket with fur lining costs more than 10 yuan, not including tickets, and he couldn't bear to buy it even if he died. When she came to the middle courtyard, the little cotton padded jacket and fried dough twists braid made the pretty widow wash clothes as usual. The hot water in the washing basin had already cooled, and her hands were red with cold. At that moment, I suddenly saw a tall and upright figure walking into the yard. Who is this? Qin Huairu didn't even recognize Du Fei at first glance, and then she looked closely before being surprised. Hey! Are you Xiaodu, Qin Jie, is it not me or who? Du Fei smiled and slowed down his pace. Qin Huairu stopped washing clothes and wiped her hands on her apron. She leaned in and said, "You're really spirited, do you think you're worth a lot of money for this outfit?" She also touched the fabric and exclaimed in surprise, "Wow! It's still Mao Lear. You really don't know how to make a living. The clothes cost at least 10 yuan. Du Fei remained non-committal. Today, he carefully considered his attitude towards Qin Huairu and the others in the courtyard. This pretty widow is certainly a high-level scheming white lotus bitch, but ultimately she is just a little woman with little culture. Even if she has more scheming, her vision, background, and her own level all limit her limits. To put it bluntly, a little leftovers, a few white flour mantou, or 1 or 2 yuan brought back from the canteen of the unit by Shaju can make this beautiful widow with a face and a figure of more than 90 points happy for a long time. As a traveler and with a cheat, Du Fei was caught by her again and decided to die. Feeling conflicted in his heart, Du Fei became less reserved when facing the pretty widow and transformed into an old driver, speeding rapidly. A few words made the pretty widow tremble, her cheeks blush, and she scolded Du Fei for talking nonsense, with every frown and smile full of charm. Du Fei didn't expect this pretty widow to suddenly use a big move and get a seductive look, almost breaking through her defense. A wave of heat surged out of his heart and began to move downwards, causing him to think to himself, "This woman is naturally charming, ordinary people really can't control her." Chapter 6. Summoning Pretty Widows. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fortunately, Du Fei had experienced it before crossing the border, and faced the charming attack of Qin Huairu. He was not seductive. On the contrary, a heavy cough came from Qin Huairu's house. A window lifted slightly, revealing half of the face of a chubby old lady, who was the beautiful widow's mother. Law Jia Zhang. Du Fei knew that the old devout lady of the Jia family was not easy to provoke. According to reason, Du Fei was only 19 years old after the end of the Chinese New Year, 11 years behind Qin Huairu, and Jia Zhang didn't even think of anything dirty. But Du Fei changed his attire, and Jia Zhang didn't recognize him. He only saw his daughter. Law talking and laughing with a tall young man, moving around. How can I bear this? Immediately issue an audible warning. Qin Huairu, however, was still unsatisfied. Although it was only a moment, it was only a few words that made her feel very relaxed and interesting. Glancing at the mother. Law in the room, a hint of sadness surged inexplicably in my heart. Aunt Jia is at home, Du Fei greeted with a smile. Jia Zhang finally realized that this person with a dog-like appearance was actually a young boy from the Du family in the backyard. With a sigh of relief in his heart, he casually lowered the window. In her opinion, Du Fei was just a little brat, and she couldn't look up to Qin Huairu, who was a waste of flowers and willows. But he didn't know that Du Fei was quite old before his time traveling, and Qin Widow was considered young and beautiful in his eyes. Qin Huairu felt a bit embarrassed and didn't want to chat with Du Fei anymore. She was about to continue washing clothes when Du Fei called out, "Qin Jia, do you have a sewing machine at home?" Qin Huairu retorted, "Do you want to use it?" "Look at what you're saying, I wouldn't know how to use that thing," Du Fei chuckled. "It's already winter and my bedding is broken. I'll just replace it with a new one." Qin Huairu had a surprised expression on her face. In this year and age, changing to a new set of bedding is not easy. Cotton tickets alone can stump countless people. Making new bedding is just a dowry for a new daughter. Law. Du Fei actually said that he could change. This is not a tycoon, but a spendthrift. The only remaining kindness in Qin Huairu's heart made a hint of pity flash in her eyes. Du Fei didn't know yet, but he had already equated himself with a spendthrift in the heart of a pretty widow, and continued, "Qin Jia, it's a pity to replace that set of bedding and throw it away. I thought about washing it clean, changing it into a cotton curtain, and hanging it on the doors and windows." Qin Huairu's eyes rolled and she could hear the meaning behind Du Fei's words. However, changing the bedding into cotton curtains and even changing the washing belt is not a small project. This pretty widow, although she speaks beautifully in the courtyard and is very enthusiastic about any matters in each household, will never put in any effort in vain. Du Fei didn't want to waste any effort on her, so he quickly said, "Qin Jia, don't worry, I won't let you work for nothing, 50 cents. The pretty widow's eyes lit up, and she was even more convinced that Du Fei was a small spendthrift. Although the task was tedious, in the end it was just dismantling and washing the quilt. According to her calculations, 30 cents was enough, but Du Fei actually gave 50 cents as soon as he spoke. Qin Huairu decided not to wash her clothes, so she immediately went home to get a ruler and was busy going to the backyard with Du Fei. Unexpectedly, as soon as he turned around, he was called out again, "Hey! Qin Huairu, are you?" As he spoke, his hair was disheveled, he was wearing a dirty green cotton jacket, and a greasy silly pillar walked out of the main room in the courtyard. Silly Zhu has had a lot of thoughts about Qin Huairu over the years. Although he didn't say anything, he was already convinced in his heart and regarded Qin Huairu as a forbidden domain. Suddenly discovered Qin Hui like wind, fire, and fire, as if to follow a little white face. Immediately alert, open your eyes wide, and stare at Du Fei, "Brother Zhu, I'm begging Sister Qin for some help," Du Fei smiled. Silly Zhu was taken aback, looked up and down, and then recognized, "Are you Du Fei?" Qin Huairu couldn't wait for them to continue gossiping. She turned around and glared at Silly Zhu, "Xiaodu has something else to do, you can talk about it later." She quickly dragged Du Fei away. Today is Sunday, and the old ladies in the courtyard are all at home. Who wouldn't know how to unpack and wash the bedding? Qin Huai was afraid of having long dreams at night and was robbed of this 50-cent job. Watching the pretty widow and Du Fei enter the moonlit door, silly Zhu scratched the back of his head in a casual manner, but didn't think much about it. Du Fei is about 10 years behind him and Qin Huairu, and he is not of the same generation at all. Upon discovering that Xiao Bai's face was Du Fei, he lifted his guard and hummed a tune, swaying and walking towards the outside of the courtyard. Du Fei followed behind the pretty widow and walked straight to his doorstep. The door was not locked, but Qin Huairu had some discretion and allowed Du Fei to open the door and enter the room. The tattered Kong mat had long been discarded by Du Fei, and the Kong was bare with a rolled-up bedding. Qin Huairu was also very straightforward in her work. When she asked where the cotton curtain was to be hung, she immediately lifted her legs onto the Kong, pursed her big buttocks, measured with a ruler, and recorded while saying, "You can rest assured that I'll handle this job for you, sister. I'll definitely get it done for you." Du Fei stood confidently on the ground, watching the pretty widow busy. As she measured her size, she looked at the blanket roll and said, "I'll take you to the courtyard." Qin Huairu glanced at him and pursed her lips, "Don't bother, I'll dirty your newly bought leather jacket again." As he spoke, he lifted his hair, inserted a bamboo ruler into his neck, and vigorously picked up the heavy bedding roll before leaving. When the pretty widow left, Du Fei closed the door and came back. He also changed his clothes and started to get busy. First, use a broom to sweep away all the broken soil and debris on the Kong. However, due to years of neglect, more and more debris is being swept away. Du Fei is also very helpless, so he has to make do with laying the newly purchased Kong mat. The Kong mat I bought this time is not made of bamboo, but made of reeds. Although reed mats are not as durable as bamboo mats, they are more comfortable to use and not as cold in winter. Go and light the stove again, heat up the Kong, and then spread out the newly bought bedding and dry it thoroughly on the hot Kong. The bedding bought from the department store, although new, is stored in the warehouse and has been stored for an unknown amount of time, inevitably containing moisture. After finishing these, Du Fei went to the outer room to gather the remaining coal balls and firewood. It looks like winter is coming soon, and his leftover food is definitely not enough to burn. He will have to go buy more later. Also, we need to have more food at home. Even if we don't lack money now, we can't always go to restaurants to eat. Firstly, we can't afford meat and grain tickets, and secondly, the impact is not good. After all, in this era, there are no serious people who always don't cook at home. While Du Fei was working and pondering how to live in the future, suddenly a knock came from the door. "Who is it?" Du Fei responded and looked up. "Comrade Du Fei, I am Sun Chang." A young man dressed elegantly and looking quite simple pushed open the door and walked in. "My dad asked me to come and deliver something." Du Fei didn't expect Director Sun to act so quickly and deliver the money ticket the next day. It seems that he is also afraid of long dreams at night. "It's Brother Sun, please come inside, look at me in this mess." Du Fei smiled and patted the coal ash on his hands, took off his work jacket, washed his hands in the basin, and invited Sun Chang to the inner room. Fortunately, Du Fei had experienced it before crossing the border, and faced the charming attack of Qin Huairu. He was not seductive. On the contrary, a heavy cough came from Qin Huairu's house. A window lifted slightly, revealing half of the face of a chubby old lady, who was the beautiful widow's mother. Law Jia Zhang. Du Fei knew that the old devout lady of the Jia family was not easy to provoke. According to reason, Du Fei was only 19 years old after the end of the Chinese New Year, 11 years behind Qin Huairu, and Jia Zhang didn't even think of anything dirty. But Du Fei changed his attire, and Jia Zhang didn't recognize him. He only saw his daughter. Law talking and laughing with a tall young man, moving around. "How can I bear this? Immediately issue an audible warning." Qin Huairu, however, was still unsatisfied. Although it was only a moment, it was only a few words that made her feel very relaxed and interesting. Glancing at the mother. Law in the room, a hint of sadness surged inexplicably in my heart. Aunt Jia is at home, Du Fei greeted with a smile. Jia Zhang finally realized that this person with a dog-like appearance was actually a young boy from the Du family in the backyard. With a sigh of relief in his heart, he casually lowered the window. In her opinion, Du Fei was just a little brat, and she couldn't look up to Qin Huairu, who was a waste of flowers and willows. But he didn't know that Du Fei was quite old before his time traveling, and Qin Widow was considered young and beautiful in his eyes. Qin Huairu felt a bit embarrassed and didn't want to chat with Du Fei anymore. She was about to continue washing clothes when Du Fei called out, "Qin Jie, do you have a sewing machine at home?" Qin Huairu retorted, "Do you want to use it?" "Look at what you're saying, I wouldn't know how to use that thing," Du Fei chuckled. "It's already winter and my bedding is broken. I'll just replace it with a new one." Qin Huairu had a surprised expression on her face. In this year and age, changing to a new set of bedding and bedding is not easy. Cotton tickets alone can stump countless people. Making new bedding is just a dowry for a new daughter. Law. Du Fei actually said that he could change. This is not a tycoon, but a spendthrift. The only remaining kindness in Qin Huairu's heart made a hint of pity flash in her eyes. Du Fei didn't know yet, but he had already equated himself with a spendthrift in the heart of a pretty widow, and continued, "Qin Jie, it's a pity to replace that set of bedding and throw it away. I thought about washing it clean, changing it into a cotton curtain, and hanging it on the doors and windows." Qin Huairu's eyes rolled and she could hear the meaning behind Du Fei's words. However, changing the bedding into cotton curtains and even changing the washing belt is not a small project. This pretty widow, although she speaks beautifully in the courtyard and is very enthusiastic about any matters in each household, will never put in any effort in vain. Du Fei didn't want to waste any effort on her, so he quickly said, "Qin Jie, don't worry, I won't let you work for nothing, 50 cents. The pretty widow's eyes lit up, and she was even more convinced that Du Fei was a small spendthrift. Although the task was tedious, in the end it was just dismantling and washing the quilt. According to her calculations, 30 cents was enough, but Du Fei actually gave 50 cents as soon as she spoke. Qin Huairu decided not to wash her clothes, so she immediately went home to get a ruler and was busy going to the backyard with Du Fei. Unexpectedly, as soon as he turned around, he was called out again, "Hey! Qin Huairu, are you?" As he spoke, his hair was disheveled, he was wearing a dirty green cotton jacket, and a greasy silly pillar walked out of the main room in the courtyard. Silly Zhu has had a lot of thoughts about Qin Huairu over the years. Although he didn't say anything, he was already convinced in his heart and regarded Qin Huairu as a forbidden domain. Suddenly discovered Qin Huai like wind and fire, as if to follow a little white face, immediately alert, wide-eyed, staring at Du Fei. "Brother Zhu, I'm begging Sister Qin for some help," Du Fei smiled. Silly Zhu was taken aback, looked up and down, and then recognized, "Are you Du Fei?" Qin Huairu couldn't wait for them to continue gossiping. She turned around and glared at Silly Zhu, "Xiaodu has something else to do, you can talk about it later." She quickly dragged Du Fei away. Today is Sunday, and the old ladies in the courtyard are all at home. Who wouldn't know how to unpack and wash the bedding? Qin Huai was afraid of having long dreams at night and was robbed of this 50-cent job. Watching the pretty widow and Du Fei sneak into the moonlit door, Silly Zhu casually scratched the back of his head, but didn't think much about it. Du Fei is about 10 years behind him and Qin Huairu, and he is not of the same generation at all. Upon discovering that Xiao Bai's face was Du Fei, he lifted his guard and hummed a tune, swaying and walking towards the outside of the courtyard. Du Fei followed behind the pretty widow and walked straight to his doorstep. The door was not locked, but Qin Huairu had some discretion and allowed Du Fei to open the door and enter the room. The tattered Kong mat had long been discarded by Du Fei, and the Kong was bare with a rolled-up bedding. Qin Huairu was also very straightforward in her work. When she asked where the cotton curtain was to be hung, she immediately lifted her legs onto the Kong, pursed her big buttocks, measured with a ruler, and recorded while saying, "You can rest assured that I'll handle this job for you, sister. I'll definitely get it done for you." Du Fei stood confidently on the ground, watching the pretty widow busy. As she measured her size, she looked at the blanket roll and said, "I'll take you to the courtyard." Qin Huiru glanced at him and pursed her lips, "Don't bother, I'll dirty your newly bought leather jacket again." As he spoke, he lifted his hair, inserted a bamboo ruler into his neck, and vigorously picked up the heavy bedding roll before leaving. When the pretty widow left, Du Fei closed the door and came back. He also changed his clothes and started to get busy. First, use a broom to sweep away all the broken soil and debris on the Kong. However, due to years of neglect, more and more debris is being swept away. Du Fei is also very helpless, so he has to make do with laying the newly purchased Kong mat. The Kong mat I bought this time is not made of bamboo, but made of reeds. Although reed mats are not as durable as bamboo mats, they are more comfortable to use and not as cold in winter. Go and light the stove again, heat up the Kong, and then spread out the newly bought bedding and dry it thoroughly on the hot Kong. The bedding bought from the department store, although new, is stored in the warehouse and has been stored for an unknown amount of time, inevitably containing moisture. After finishing these, Du Fei went to the outer room to gather the remaining coal balls and firewood. It looks like winter is coming soon, and his leftover food is definitely not enough to burn. He will have to go buy more later. Also, we need to have more food at home. Even if we don't lack money now, we can't always go to restaurants to eat. Firstly, we can't afford meat and grain tickets, and secondly, the impact is not good. After all, in this era, there are no serious people who always don't cook at home. While Du Fei was working and pondering how to live in the future, suddenly a knock came from the door. "Who is it?" Du Fei responded and looked up. "Comrade Du Fei, I am Sun Chang." A young man dressed elegantly and looking quite simple pushed open the door and walked in. "My dad asked me to come and deliver something." Du Fei didn't expect Director Sun to act so quickly and deliver the money ticket the next day. It seems that he is also afraid of long dreams at night. "It's Brother Sun, please come inside, look at me in this mess." Du Fei smiled and patted the coal ash on his hands, took off his work jacket, washed his hands in the basin, and invited Sun Chang to the inner room. Chapter 7. A New Dilemma. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Du Fei's attitude caught Sun Chang off guard. Although Sun Chang brought thousands of yuan worth of money with him this time, in his opinion, it still cannot be changed. It was his father who bullied others and took Du Fei's place in the factory. Although 1,000 yuan is not a big deal, it is far less than the official state-owned worker in a steel mill. As long as he works in the factory until the age of 30, his annual salary and various benefits are definitely more than 1,000 yuan. More importantly, the formal job at the steel rolling mill can be taken over by the children in the future, which is a truly secure job for both drought and flood. You sit down first, the newly bought jasmine flower is very fragile today. Du Fei took the thermos, scalded the cup, opened the tea bag on the table, and pinched one cup a little. At this time, ordinary people don't pay much attention to drinking tea, especially when it's high in quality, and they don't like washing tea. If they pour the first brew, the taste will fade after the second one. Sun Chang glanced at the character, Zhang Yiyuan, on the tea bag, picked up the teacup with great manners, took a sip, and then reached into his cotton jacket, took out an envelope, and pushed it to Du Fei. Du Fei took it over and weighed it, but didn't open it to check. Director Sun is a smart person, and at this point in the matter, there is no need to tamper with these money tickets. Sun Chang took out a small piece of paper with 2 red seals and said, "This is a job introduction letter. Please keep it. Tomorrow morning, go to the street office to report to Director Wang." Du Fei didn't ask too much this time. He took the introduction letter and carefully read it twice. This introduction letter should have been prepared long ago, otherwise even if Director Sun's relationship is tough, it would not have been possible to get it out overnight. 2 red seals, one from Du Fei's former high school and the other from the District Youth League Committee. Because they are temporary workers, they do not occupy cadre status and do not need to go through organizational procedures. In fact, Du Fei knew very well that this introduction letter was just a cover-up, and what really worked was Director Sun's private operations. That's it, I'll go back first. Sun Chang stood up after completing the task. Although from as soon as Du Fei entered the door, he greeted him with a smile, but Sun Chang always felt like he was too young to do anything wrong. Recalling Lin Lin's various stories that his father recounted yesterday, he became increasingly convinced that Du Fei in front of him was a smiling tiger who ate people but didn't spit out bones. Okay, then take your time and let's talk later when you have time. Du Fei smiled as he bid farewell to Sun Chang, but frowned tightly when he returned to the room. First, open the envelope and check the money receipt inside. Sure enough, it's exactly the same. 500 yuan is a brand new unity, the bicycle ticket is permanently increased by 28, and the radio ticket is for the Shanghai 132 model. But at this moment, Du Fei had no time to read more. He simply put it in his personal space and turned to staring at the introduction letter, his mind racing. This time, when Sun Chang was asked to deliver something, Director Sun didn't even show up, indicating that the matter had come to an end. Both parties had settled the money and goods, and it was even more impossible to send Du Fei to the street to report tomorrow. For this result, Du Fei had already anticipated that Director Sun was not his biological father and had no obligation to protect him step by step. But in this way, it will be difficult for him to establish himself in the street office in the future. If you are really dumbfounded and take the introduction letter to report on your own, there won't be any problems, but you will have to expose your shortcomings. A place like the street office cannot hide secrets at all. Whether it is a formal establishment or a temporary worker, regardless of their background or connections, everyone knows everything. If on the first day of Du Fei's registration, Director Sun made no statement and indirectly declared that it had nothing to do with Du Fei, it would inevitably put Du Fei in an awkward situation and make him the bottom of the food chain in the street office. This is not possible. Go to the street office, you can't be a doormat. Du Fei gritted his teeth secretly, thinking about how to break through the situation. Subconsciously, he leads first think of an old man named Yi Zhonghai. Yi Zhonghai's identity as an 8th-level fitter and his relationship with Director Sun, as well as being an elder in the courtyard, can barely represent Director Sun in sending Du Fei to the street office. Moreover, previously, for the sake of Director Sun, Yi Zhonghai was equivalent to having a handle on Du Fei. Du Fei believes that as long as he makes a request, Yi Zhonghai will not refuse to send him to report. However, although level 8 fitters are expensive, ultimately they are still workers and their weight is not enough. Moreover, once Yi Zhonghai is found, it is equivalent to telling Director Sun that he has limited skills and no other connections available, and there is no other way to think. Du Fei's face became increasingly stern, trying to find a breakthrough from the original owner's memory. Finally, after racking his brains and searching his heart and soul, he found someone. This person's name is Chen Zhongyuan, and in the original owner's memory, the impression of this person is quite vague. According to generations, Du Fei should be called his third uncle, who was the cousin of the original owner's mother. He came to Beijing from his hometown more than 10 years ago and lived with him for half a year. But later on, the original owner's mother passed away and gradually lost contact. Until this time, the original owner's father had an accident and appeared at the funeral wearing a police uniform. But the original owner was in a state of confusion throughout the entire process, except for being dressed in police uniform. He only vaguely remembered that Chen Zhongyuan was working at the Public Security Department of the Municipal Bureau. Whether this third uncle, who has not been in contact for more than 10 years, can help, Du Fei is uncertain in his heart. But it doesn't prevent him from coming to his door and giving it a try. Even if I can't help this time, having a relative who works as a police officer is not a bad thing. Thinking of this, Du Fei made up his mind. Take a look at the clock, it's almost 4 o'clock. Tomorrow I will go to the street office to report, and Chen Zhongyuan must go there tonight, Du Fei thought silently. Hurry up and go to the supply and marketing cooperative. I originally wanted to buy 2 bottles of Maotai, but unfortunately there were no dedicated Maotai liquor tickets available. I had to settle for the second best option. First, I would like 2 bottles of Laufen liquor, along with 2 barrels of malt extract, a front door, and a pack of authentic big white rabbit milk candy. The first time I visit that third uncle, I definitely can't go empty-handed. I always need to bring some gifts. However, Du Fei didn't go over immediately after buying things. At this time, coming to my door and rushing to have dinner, it's inevitable that both sides are embarrassed and some things are difficult to say. Du Fei came back from shopping, and Qin Huairu had already dismantled the bedding and was washing cotton. The water in the big basin has turned black, but after washing the cotton, some white is exposed. The pretty widow moaned and washed vigorously, and when she saw Du Fei, she quickly called out to him, "Hey, Xiao Du, come here." Du Fei's hands were empty, and he threw everything into the space. He came to Qin Huairu and glanced at the black water in the basin, feeling a bit awkward. Qin Huairu didn't take it seriously, continuing to wash the cotton while raising her chin beside her. These cotton are pretty good. After washing them, bounce them again, just like new ones. But those fabrics are all terrible, can you see if they still work? Du Fei looked at the pile of rags next to him, all of which had just been dismantled by Qin Huairu. Reaching out and picking up a piece, before exerting too much force, he pricked and tore open a big hole. Du Fei finally realized that he had taken it for granted. These rags must not be used anymore. If we insist on making ends meet, even if they are made into curtains, it will still be a waste of work and will tear apart in 2.5 days. It's okay, Du Fei thought to himself at this moment. He only went to Chen Zhongyuan's house at night and didn't care about this matter. He said to Qin Huairu, "You wash the cotton first, and I'll bring some new cloth later." Du Fei's open and straightforward attitude actually made the pretty widow feel a bit uncomfortable. She opened her mouth and hesitated to speak. Du Fei, however, was worried and hurried back and forth, returning to the backyard. Chapter 8. Dooming in the Dark. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After Du Fei left, Jia Zhang's chubby face immediately peeked out of her house and said with a sly expression, "I'll just say that silly kid doesn't have much heart." With pride, he walked towards the pile of rags and reached out to pull out 2 large pieces of cloth that still looked very sturdy from below. These 2 pieces of cloth should be used tightly, enough to make a cloth shirt for Bangang. Mom, the pretty widow lowered her voice with a hint of dissatisfaction. You keep your voice down, let people hear you. What have I become? Jia Zhang's dead eye turned and looked at his daughter. In law with disdain. Qin Huairu suddenly felt both helpless and aggrieved. She entered the top shift of the steel rolling mill purely to drive ducks onto the shelves. A young widow from a rural background who hasn't attended school for a few days, with no knowledge in her mind and no strength in her hands, is skilled in manipulating machine tools in the workshop. Du Fei returned home and didn't cook dinner again. Just take some hot tea, eat some dim sum bought during the day, wait until 5:30, change clothes and go out. First, go to the front yard and knock on the door of Mr. San's house. Who is it? The third aunt asked loudly. Me, little Du in the backyard. Du Fei responded and pushed open the door directly. The room was eating, and he didn't walk inside. He said at the door, "Third master, I have something urgent tonight. I'll borrow your bicycle." The third master truly deserves to be called Yen Laoku. As soon as he heard that he wanted to borrow a bicycle, he was about to explode. That was his treasure. Before he could swallow it, he was busy rejecting it. Unexpectedly, Du Fei smiled and took out 50 cents from his pocket. I know your rules, it's not worth borrowing, he said. The third master narrowed his eyes and immediately swallowed the words on his lips. He smiled as he went to get the car key and reminded, the lights are dark, so be careful. Deli, Sandiyi, rest assured that you will return to Xiaoe in perfect condition. Du Feixin swore to take the key and said, you eat, I'll leave first. Without hesitation, he opened the bicycle parked at the door, kicked the ladder, and pushed it out. The north wind is howling on the street and a cold wave is coming, causing a significant drop in temperature as soon as it gets dark. Du Fei grabbed the cold handlebar, feeling a bit regretful for not wearing gloves. The distance from Sihiyuan to the family courtyard of the municipal bureau was not close, but fortunately, the road was deserted at night, and the bicycle was kicked up. It took over half an hour to finally reach the destination. Du Fei didn't know where his third uncle, Furniture, lived, so he decided to go straight to the gatepost. There are guards here, and upon discovering Du Fei's face, he immediately perked up. Comrade, hello. Du Fei stopped 2 or 3 meters apart and smiled. I have an urgent matter to contact Chen Zhongyuan from the Public Security Department. Can you help me contact him? That's my third uncle. Although this guard is on guard, he is also the logistics organization of the Public Security Bureau, and the leaders of all sizes in the bureau are generally in his mind. Upon hearing Chen Zhongyuan's name and being from the Public Security Department, he must be Deputy Director Chen. Looking carefully at Du Fei again, he saw that he was tall and well-proportioned, dressed in a Zhongshan suit and brand-new leather shoes, and very dignified, unlike a criminal. Even so, it is impossible to casually put people inside. The guard asked Du Fei's name and called Chen Zhongyuan inside the guard's booth to confirm before putting Du Fei inside. The courtyard is filled with newly built red brick residential buildings after the founding of the People's Republic of China, with a total of 6 buildings in front and back. The distance between the buildings is very large, and the entire courtyard covers an extremely wide area. Chen Zhongyuan's house is located on the 3rd floor of Unit 4 in Building 3. Du Fei parked his bicycle downstairs and carried it. Let's go upstairs. On the 3rd floor, the door to the room on the left side was open, and inside the door stood a beautiful young woman in her 30s. Seeing Du Fei come up, the young woman looked at him and smiled, saying, Xiao Fei, in the blink of an eye, you've been so tall for over 10 years. Du Fei realized that this should be Chen Zhongyuan's daughter. Law. He quickly called out to his third aunt and handed over the tobacco and alcohol gifts, while also recalling some deep memories in his mind. This third aunt's name is Shinjinya, and she comes from a special background. Before the liberation, she was the aunt of a big capitalist, 2 years older than Chen Zhongyuan. When they got married, there were many twists and turns. You come as soon as you come, what else are you carrying? Shinjinya frowned as she looked at the gift brought by Du Fei. Not too little, but too much. Old Chen, look at Xiaofei, this kid, he said with a complaint as he turned back to the room. At this moment, Chen Zhongyuan also walked from behind. He was wearing a light blue long nightgown, about the same height as Du Fei, and his appearance was about 6 or 7 parts similar. Due to not wearing police uniforms, Chen Zhongyuan at this time was less majestic than Du Fei's impression, and more handsome and gentle. There are 2 children behind him, blinking their big eyes and looking curiously at Du Fei. Du Fei grinned and called out, "Third uncle. Let's talk first." Chen Zhongyuan nodded and glanced at the gift, but didn't say anything else. This building is different from a large courtyard, it looks much cleaner. The living room covers an area of 15 or 16 square meters. Although the floor is not made of ceramic tiles, it is painted light green like a wall fence, with sofas, coffee tables, and high and low cabinets. The lamp is not an ordinary tungsten filament bulb, but a white fluorescent lamp. Du Fei changed his slippers and followed him to sit on the sofa below. The spring under the buttocks compresses, making a creaking sound. Aunt San was busy brewing tea and introduced the 2 children to Du Fei. The boy is 8 years old, named Chen Jianxi, and the girl is 6 years old, named Xiaoe. The two children called Du Fei brother, but their eyes stared at the bag of big white rabbit milk candy and didn't put it away. Shen Jingya sent the two children inside to play with 2 pieces of candy. There are only 3 adults left in the living room. Chen Zhongyuan came straight to the point and asked Du Fei what had happened. I came to my door late at night, carrying a gift, clearly asking for help. In front of Chen Zhongyuan, Du Fei didn't hide anything and directly poured beans from the bamboo tube, explaining the whole story. After listening to Du Fei's narration, both Chen Zhongyuan and his wife showed incredible expressions. Especially for Chen Zhongyuan, his initial impression of this nephew was average, dull, timid, stubborn, and somewhat bookish. Unexpectedly, at a critical moment, he showed extraordinary calmness and decisiveness. Chen Zhongyuan remained silent for a moment, carefully pondered the entire process, and then looked at Du Fei with great interest, saying, "You were bullied, why didn't you come to me early?" Du Fei scratched the back of his head awkwardly and said, "Well, third uncle, I don't want to cause you trouble." "Humph. What trouble is not troublesome? I don't think you treat me as your third uncle." Chen Zhongyuan scolded with resentment, "It's been bullied to the point where I don't care who cares about you." Du Fei chuckled and didn't answer to distinguish. As for his own family, he didn't take it seriously either. Uncle Tang is not his own uncle after all, there is a layer of relationship between inside and outside, let alone not much contact for more than 10 years. Even if Chen Zhongyuan really has this relative in his heart, he will have to walk around frequently in the future to get closer. Chapter 9. Breaking Through Empty Doors. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. At this moment, Chen Zhongyuan finished speaking and continued to scrutinize Du Fei. Seeing him calm, he nodded secretly and gave this nephew, who had been absent for a long time, a higher evaluation. "Speaking of which, you are also rare. If it were me, at your age, I wouldn't be able to do it to your level." Chen Zhongyuan smiled and took a sip of tea. Normally, although the person surnamed Sun is not authentic about this matter, the condition is that you proposed it and received their money, which can be considered satisfactory. "Why did you come to me again tonight?" Du Fei smiled bitterly and said his true purpose. Chen Zhongyuan and his wife exchanged a glance and looked at Du Fei even more with admiration. They asked, "You're not very old, why are you so clear about the twists and turns of the mechanism?" Du Fei explained that it was taught by a teacher during school. As a police officer, Chen Zhongyuan could tell at a glance that he was not telling the truth, but he did not investigate. Instead, he laughed and said, "Your concerns are not unfounded. If you report to the street office tomorrow, it will definitely not be easy to get along in the future." Du Fei accompanied with a smile. Chen Zhongyuan pondered again, "But my identity is special and it's not suitable for me to send you to report. I'll have your aunt go tomorrow. She works at the District Youth League Committee, and your job introduction letter happened to come from there. It's perfect for your aunt to go and see you off." Du Fei quickly thanked and finally breathed a sigh of relief. As long as Shen Jingya comes forward, it represents Chen Zhongyuan. It will not be a secret for Du Fei to be Chen Zhongyuan's nephew in the street. But Du Fei knew very well that Chen Zhongyuan could only do so far. Thinking about his kinship, Chen Zhongyuan can shed some shade to shield him from wind and rain, but he won't invest more resources unless he shows greater value and potential. Du Fei has a good sense of propriety, and once he achieves the purpose of this trip, he will not mention this matter again. After finishing some household chores, as it was almost 8 o'clock, he stood up and said goodbye. Chen Zhongyuan sent him downstairs to watch him take a long walk on the bike before going upstairs. Upon returning home, Shen Jingya had just washed the teacups they had used. When she saw her own men coming back, she couldn't help but joke, "Old Chen, it's a waste of you always boasting that you can see people accurately. What did you say before? My cousin's son, like his father, is all goosebumps. If I hadn't seen him today, I would have truly believed your lies." Chen Zhongyuan awkwardly touched his nose and said, I don't know how this kid got enlightened. I don't know who he learned from, but he's very mature in speaking and handling things. He looks simple and honest, but he's actually very smooth. Shen Jingya smiled and said, do you still need to learn? Did you just follow my uncle? Just now, you two sat together talking, with thick eyebrows and big eyes, and a righteous face, but neither of you was a good person. Chen Zhongyuan's old face turned red when his wife heard him. Then he became angry again. He rushed forward with one swift step and made a family law. Du Fei rode his bicycle all the way back to the courtyard in the cold wind. At this moment, the temperature was even lower and the wind was blowing harder. However, Du Fei didn't pay much attention and easily pedaled his bicycle as fast as possible. This incident went smoothly beyond imagination. Before coming, Du Fei had envisioned several situations and had planned various coping methods in his mind, but none of them were useful. This made him realize that he seemed to have taken things for granted. The interpersonal relationships and kinship in this era are much more important than in later generations. In addition, Chen Zhongyuan was able to agree so happily because Du Fei's expectations were limited, which was just a small gesture for him. If Du Fei is insatiable and wants to borrow Chen Zhongyuan's connections to transition from a temporary worker to a formal cadre, he will definitely end up unhappy tonight. So Du Fei is very knowledgeable. From beginning to end the last word did not mention the possibility of becoming a full-time employee in the future. When he returned to the courtyard, it was already 8:30 p.m. About 10 meters away from the gate, one leg got off the car's seat and used only one foot to step on the pedals, sliding to the door through inertia. Unexpectedly, a figure suddenly rushed out of the door. Du Fei was startled and the handlebar shook, almost falling. Thanks to his quick reflexes, he jumped down with both feet and finally stabilized his balance. Upon closer inspection, the person's cheeks turned red from the cold, and it was none other than Yan Jiquang, the third son of the third master's family. Brother Du, my dad asked me to wait for you here. Yan Jiquang took a breath of air and wiped his nose with his sleeve. Du Fei's mouth twitched and he thought to himself that these three masters were really misers. He was afraid he might run away if he borrowed a bicycle. Entering the front yard, Yan Jiquang took a few steps and called out, Dad, my brother Du is back. As the words fell, the third master came out of the room and chuckled, Oh my, Xiaodu has returned. Du Fei pushed the bicycle forward and said, Third master, thank you. Please check and inspect it. The bicycle has returned to Xiaoe intact. The third master kept saying he didn't need it, but his eyes were fixed on the bicycle with a sly expression. Du Fei didn't rush to leave either. He stood still and waited for him to finish his inspection before thanking him again. He returned the key and headed home. Unexpectedly, as soon as I passed through the hanging flower gate from the front yard to the middle yard, I saw a sneaky figure coming out of the moonlit gate in the backyard. Judging from his height and size, it was obvious that he was not an adult. His movements were agile, and his figure flashed as he quickly crawled into the nearby Qinhuai Ru's house. Du Fei paused in his footsteps and said to himself, Why did this guy, Bang Ji, go to the backyard? Immediately, a hint of ominous premonition emerged. Sure enough, when he returned home, he soon found that someone had touched the cabinet. The originally flat blanket has also been flipped up in a corner, and there is a small footprint on the edge of the Kong. Du Fei remained calm and sat on the official hat chair. Although all the valuable things in the family were put into his personal space, Bang Yu didn't lose anything except 2 dim sum when he came in. But as soon as Du Fei thought that his home had been broken through, and that everything he ate and used had been tampered with, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Unfortunately, this era is different from later generations, and large and miscellaneous courtyards are also different from buildings, and doors cannot be easily locked. Otherwise, no one else's house will be locked, only your Iron General will keep the door locked. Those idle and boring old ladies in the neighborhood don't know how to spread rumors and arrange it. When the time comes, we will hold another general meeting of the entire court to criticize him for being a beggar thy neighbor, and he will have to be disheveled. But for stick memes, we must not tolerate and nurture traitors. If that little white-eyed wolf dares to come for the first time, he dares to come for the second time, let him taste the sweetness, and then it will be okay in the future. Du Fei doesn't want to live his life like a silly pillar, as every once in a while, his family's belongings disappear without a trace. I have to give the stick meme a lesson. Du Fei made up his mind and was already calculating. Early the next morning. Although the Kong has already cooled down, the new bedding has a significantly better insulation effect. Du Fei was wrapped in bed, with only his head and face feeling cold, and his body still warm. He didn't remember, but he made an appointment yesterday to meet Shen Jingya at the entrance of the street office at 9 o'clock this morning. The matter is of great importance, and one cannot be late in any case. Du Fei didn't have a bicycle, so he walked from the courtyard to the street office, which took at least half an hour, and then went to have breakfast. He had to go out before 8 o'clock. Chapter 10. Street Office. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Du Fei gritted his teeth and hummed as he crawled out of the bed. He quickly put on his clothes, washed his face, and brushed his teeth. After tidying himself up, he finally put on his newly bought dog leather-lined half-coat in front of the mirror, and his whole body was instantly full of energy. Pushing the door open, I met Su Damao brushing his teeth. "Big brother, good morning." Du Fei said hello, you. "Who are you?" Su Damao looked surprised. Yesterday afternoon, he didn't see Du Fei in this outfit. "Isn't this work settled?" "I'll report now," Du Fei replied with a smile. Su Damao was taken aback for a moment and casually said, "Hey, I'm telling you, you can't do any work in the factory." But as soon as he spoke, he suddenly remembered what Du Fei had said last time and tentatively said, "Man, don't you really? Don't you go to the factory?" Until now, Du Fei has not been hiding anything and has let out a, "not going to the factory, go to the street office." "Humph," Su Damao exclaimed in surprise, "it's really a change of gun. Hey! Take the street to handle it. Just give it a thumbs up, it's still you cow." Du Fei hurriedly said, "Big brother, don't flatter me. You're just a temporary worker, just trying to be frugal." "Alright, I won't tell you anymore. It's almost time, I'll leave first. Then hurry up and don't delay the main business. Come home tonight and have your sister-in-law prepare 2 good dishes for us to drink." As Su Damao watched Du Fei walk away, he secretly thought to himself, what's wrong with Du Fei? Why did he keep silent and go straight to the street office to work? Although they are temporary workers and cannot compete with state-owned formal workers in steel mills, the street office has many hidden benefits, such as those in front of their eyes who buy cabbage in winter. If there are people in the street office, they can get good food first. There are also things like dividing houses, registering household registration, and having children go to school that cannot be separated from street offices. Du Fei walked into the courtyard. As usual, it was still a noisy scene. However, today I happened to meet an old man who was going to work. Yi Zhonghai saw Du Fei and greeted him with a smile. "Xiao Du, are you going to report today? Don't be surprised if you have any difficulties, just mention them to an old man." Du Fei's heart twitched as he heard the implied meaning from Yi Zhonghai. Taking another glance at the old lady standing behind Yi Zhonghai at his doorstep, she suddenly realized that this was no coincidence, it had been waiting for him for a long time. Yi Zhonghai is an old and refined person who knows that Director Sun is not going to send Du Fei to report and wants to take him over as a favor. Speaking indirectly, it was actually intentionally waiting for Du Fei to beg him. Du Fei figured out the whole story and couldn't help but secretly laugh at Yi Zhonghai, an old man who had been calculating his plans 3 times. He didn't bother to point it out and said with a smile, "Thank you for your concern. If there's anything I want to do, I won't stand out with you. It's almost time for me to take a step first." Yi Zhonghai was stunned for a moment, watching Du Fei accelerate out of the courtyard door, blinking his eyes, somewhat skeptical of life, which was completely different from his plan. Shouldn't Du Fei be so anxious to beg him? Doesn't Du Fei know that he was reporting with a letter of introduction? No, I'm not right, this damn child doesn't understand at all. Yi Zhonghai suddenly realized, thinking he had found the crux, with a constipated expression on his face. This matter has caused a lot of trouble. If I had known I was still pretending to be modest, I should have taken the initiative to send Du Fei to the street office and even snatched a favor back. Du Fei was unaware of the twists and turns in Yi Zhonghai's heart, and had no time to speculate about him. After leaving the courtyard, head straight to Nanluo Supply and Marketing Cooperative. The restaurant over there doesn't serve breakfast, but there is a shop selling steamed buns nearby. In the morning, there are also fermented sour milk made from ground mung bean Wow Gold, coke rings salted vegetables and the like. Du Fei is not used to fermented sour milk made from ground mung bean Wow Gold. He only bought some steamed buns to cushion his stomach. Arriving at the entrance of the street office in advance, he didn't just wait outside and went straight into the nearby gatehouse. The street office is also located in a courtyard, occupying the first two courtyards. The third hospital and rear housing are under the jurisdiction of the District Grain Management Office. The watchman at the gatehouse was boiling water when he saw a young man with a good appearance come in. He didn't make a big fuss and asked directly, "Sir, what's up?" Du Fei handed over a large front door and said, "Grandpa, what is your surname?" "Excuse me, your surname is Feng." The old man sniffed his cigarette under his nose. "Mr. Feng, my name is Du Fei. I came to report today. It's too cold outside, so I'm hiding with you." Du Fei chuckled. "Reported in." Mr. Feng looked suspicious. "Then why bother going in here? It's not waiting for the leadership of the Youth League Committee. The agreed time of 9 o'clock will be right away," Du Fei replied as he looked at the wall clock. There were still more than 10 minutes left. Upon hearing this, Grandpa Feng couldn't help but take a second glance at Du Fei and pointed to the window. "Stand there, people from outside can see," he said. Du Fei said thank you and stood in front of the window, stretching his neck to look out. In just 5 or 6 minutes, with a ringing bell, Shen Jingya rode a flying pigeon slanted beam bicycle to the front of the street office. Du Fei's eyes were sharp, and he quickly welcomed him out and called out to his third aunt. "Have you been waiting for half a day?" Shen Jingya pushed her bike and let out a sigh of relief. Du Feilian said no, and he had just arrived. He followed Shen Jingya and walked towards the street office. Passing through the front yard, the two went directly to the director's office in the backyard. Shen Jingya lowered herself while walking. He said, "Director Wang here has something to do with our family. You should work hard with dim sum in the future, and your third uncle and aunt will watch you when you have a chance." Du Fei understood that the so-called opportunity is to transform from a temporary worker to a formal national cadre, and the difficulty is quite high. Shen Jingya, in other words, gave him a thought. Moreover, when the wind changes next year, everything will be in chaos. Du Fei is still grateful for his kindness, being well behaved and not revealing any flaws. As they spoke, the two of them arrived at the entrance of the north room in the courtyard, which was the office of the director and deputy director. Shen Jingya propped up her bicycle in front of the door, without any hesitation. With Du Fei, she lifted the door curtain and walked through the room into the director's office. "Oh, Xiaoshen. It's so cold, how come you have the time to come to sister's place?" A middle-aged woman in her 40s and 60s, slightly overweight, with a beard on her head, emerged from behind her desk with a surprised expression and walked quickly to meet Shen Jingya. Shen Jingya also smiled and pretended to be angry. "Sister Wang, look at what you said. If it's okay, I wouldn't like to come and see you." Director Wang snorted lightly, with a "I believe you're a ghost" expression, and then naturally looked at Du Fei next to him. "I can guess from his appearance that he has a special relationship with Chen Zhongyuan. I praised him and said, "This young man is really energetic. I haven't introduced him to you yet. Xiaoe, this is your Aunt Wang." Shen Jingya nodded and called Du Fei closer, then turned to Director Wang and said, "This child's name is Du Fei. He is our nephew, Mr. Chen's biological nephew. You will have to take care of him when he comes to work with you in the future." Du Fei. Director Wang frowned slightly and said strangely, "Du Fei, isn't it related to Director's son of the steel rolling mill?" "Why?" Shen Jingya didn't say anything carefully, just, "Hey," and evaded a long sentence.